it's the Houthis that are basically kind of threatening the ships. They're trying to also ride this popular wave of discontent in the region because a lot of people in the region are not happy with how states have handled the crises in Gaza.
What is at stake here?
Well, the biggest issue here is that this could have a spillover effect, an escalation.
Can you give us a sense of what is happening and the humanitarian crisis that the Palestinians are facing?
Beyond the people that are being killed in this indiscriminate carpet bombing of the entirety of the Gaza Strip.
Hello and welcome to Connected. I'm Divya Gopalan. What does the Red Sea crisis have to do with you? No matter where you are in the world, you are either feeling the ripples or could feel the effect soon. Now, for one thing, global shipping rates are skyrocketing, and that's likely to impact the world economy. And then, with the US and UK launching strikes on land and sea military targets in and around Yemen, there are fears of an escalation into a wider regional war that will draw in players beyond the Middle East. Now, to discuss the complex situation and the multiple conflicts arising across the Middle East, we're joined by Hisham Al-Omeisy, a former Information Resource Center Director at the US State Department and a Yemen conflict analyst, speaking to us from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much for being part of the program, Hisham. I want to start with a picture of what is happening in the Red Sea and who is involved.
Well, mainly it's the Houthis that are basically kind of threatening the ships. And the reason why they're threatening these ships and attacking them is because they wanted to come to the aid of the children and women in Gaza. And they're hoping, through applying pressure in the Red Sea, in the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, and blocking all these international ships, they would pressure the international community into a ceasefire in Gaza, into lifting the siege, the Israeli siege on Gaza. But instead of that, of course, the international community, led by the US, are basically trying to protect the navigation and attacking missile and drone launch sites in Yemen to deter the Houthis from threatening the Red Sea.
Now, before we continue, let's get some context on the war in Yemen and what the United Nations calls one of the largest humanitarian crises in the world. Since 2014, Iran-backed Houthi rebels and government forces supported by a Saudi-led coalition have been fighting for control of Yemen. The decades-long war has resulted in nearly 80% of the population needing some form of humanitarian aid. Now, in November, the Houthi rebels launched a series of strikes on commercial shipping in the Red Sea, and they say it is in support of the Palestinians following Israel's bombardment of the Gaza Strip in its 3-month-long war against Hamas. Now, Hisham, can you give us a bit more background on who are the Houthis and what their objectives are?
Well, the Houthis are a revivalist movement, Islamic revivalist movement. They've managed over the past decade to kind of hijack the government, state institutions, push out the government into the fringes, and at one point all the way abroad into Saudi Arabia and the Emirates. But the government has kind of reclaimed some space in the south and in Aden. And ever since, the Houthis have been flexing their muscles, trying to recapture more territory in Yemen. And the Houthis, of course, the claim is that they are there to basically aid in lifting the siege on Gaza, but they also have to remember that the Houthis also have their own objectives and their own agenda. They're an expansionist group, and they're trying to also ride this popular wave of discontent in the region because a lot of people in the region are not happy with how states have handled the crises in Gaza. And now the Houthis have stepped in, filled that vacuum, and coming in and pitching themselves as the heroes, as the defenders of the Muslim nation. And they are trying to win hearts and minds beyond Yemeni borders. And to be honest with you, they're scoring major big points on that term. And you have to remember they also are trying to get more concessions from the international community, especially from Saudi Arabia, because currently there's a discussion, there's a dialogue and negotiations for an agreement, a roadmap, a peace roadmap, if you will, between the Saudis and the Houthis as well. And the Houthis are also, of course, as always, seeking international legitimacy. So this was actually a golden opportunity, if you will, to basically tell the world, we are here, we're powerful, and we are power to be reckoned with.
We talked about the Yemeni humanitarian crisis. What happens then? What kind of help can the people of Yemen get, given now that the Houthi is taking this stance?
Well, Yemeni population has been held hostage to this conflict for the past 9 years, for the better part of the 9 years. We paid the price. When there are bombardments, we pay the price. It's the civilians that are hurt in strikes. When there was a blockade on Yemen, again, we paid the price because we couldn't travel. And when economic activity was almost at a complete stop, again, we paid the price because things started to vanish. And when capital flight happened in Yemen, jobs were lost. We've seen an exponential rate increase in the rate of poverty. And to us Yemenis, we're pretty much helpless. But also the international community hasn't been that helpful. Aid to Yemen has been dwindling. The international community, they weren't addressing the roots of the conflict in Yemen. The solutions are always very, very superficial. And this is one of the reasons why we're back at another conflict now, is because the roots of the conflict were never addressed over the past 9 years.
Right. And if we go back to what is happening on the Red Sea, aside from economics, with the US and the UK and the coalition now striking these, what they say are these Houthi targets, what are you concerned, or what is at stake here, especially if we look at a wider conflict?
Well, the biggest issue here is that this could have a spillover effect. An escalation in Yemen could draw in other regional actors. And then you have a serious problem there. You have to remember, the Middle East is a powder keg. And this is one of the fuses that, if lit, it could escalate really quickly. And of course, you have the resistance, the axis of resistance involved as well. You have Iran, you have Hezbollah, you have Hashd al-Sha'bi in Iraq. So it could escalate really quickly. And then it'll be really difficult to put the genie back into the bottle.
I'm going to pivot here to the economic impact. Now, as we mentioned, that the US and other nations have deployed naval forces to the Red Sea as part of Operation Prosperity Guardian. That's a multinational effort consisting of more than 20 countries to, what they say, safeguard shipping in one of the world's most critical waterways. An estimated 12% of global trade passes through the Red Sea every year, and that's worth more than $1 trillion. Project management specialist Hassan Daoud explains why the shipping disruptions are a blow for the global economy.
It is significant. Therefore, when IMF or even in the World Economic Forum, they give their prediction for 2024, it is not as promising as it should have been. We were expecting that 2024 should be better than 2023. But I think based on what we are seeing in the geopolitical front, some of the crisis would not let that happen. The overall scenario, the economic scenario and the supply chain scenario will impact the global economic indicators. I mean, you just while sitting in Pakistan or perhaps in Russia, when we spoke about Russia and Ukraine crisis sitting in Pakistan, we thought it is far and away. But the impact directly came directly to our dining tables, actually.
Right. So, Hisham, well, what's interesting here is even though the Houthis are attacking cargo liners in the Red Sea, they haven't targeted oil tankers or other energy cargo. Why is that?
They tried to. But they failed. The missile and one of the attacks kind of landed about 500 meters from the ship. And this is actually the irony here, and I'm glad you mentioned that, is that we barely made it through a crisis just a few months ago where we salvaged the Stafford oil tanker, which was back at the time going to be the worst environmental crisis since the ExxonMobil incident. But they're going back around and they're attacking now these ships in the Red Sea. The coalition has done somewhat of a good job, honestly, in striking down a lot of these missiles and a lot of these drones. But the thing is that with a sustained attack in a manner that the Houthis are doing, it's just a matter of time when one of these missiles is going to hit and blow up a ship.
Right. And so you're talking about the coalition doing a good job somehow mitigating some of the Houthi attacks, but are they actually deterring them? Is the coalition show of force having any effect in making the Houthis think, okay, well, this is not the way to go about things, and maybe we should stop these actions?
Oh, definitely not. The Houthis, you have to remember, they've been looking for this opportunity for escalation for decades, not just even the 10 years, for the past few decades, because part of their motto is death to America, death to Israel. They've always pitched themselves as fighting the imperialist powers in the region, and they've always carried that on a flag. And on their various platforms and podiums, they've always said, we are at war with America. And for the past 10 years, for instance, people in Yemen were always telling them, you were at war with Yemenis, you were at war with Saudi, you were never at war with America. So this presented a perfect opportunity for them to turn around and say, see, we are finally at war with America. So whatever the coalition throws at them, they will not stop. They're relishing this moment. And of course, they don't want to be seen as the weaker force that a few airstrikes managed to deter them. So they will definitely continue to retaliate. And this has been happening now. For instance, last night, the coalition launched the 8th wave since the first airstrikes in Yemen, when in the beginning, the coalition said it was going to be one wave of limited airstrikes. But we warned back at the time, and we said, this is going to be quickly spiral down to a tit for tat. And this is basically what happened. It's become into a tit for tat, and the Houthis will continue to do that because they want to milk this opportunity.
So tell us about Iran's involvement and what it will take now for the Houthis to stand down or to come to some kind of an agreement.
The Iranians support and back the Houthis. They provide them with a lot of technology transfer, with money, with expertise, with training, capacity building. But the Houthis have also their own mindset. Yes, they are on the same page with Iran. Yes, they derive a lot of their moves from the same playbook, but they also have their own mindset and they want to chart their own path. And we need to focus also on the fact that the Houthis themselves are an expansionist group. They don't want to stop at Yemen borders. They've said this before. They want to expand and take also control of the Holy Lands in Mecca. But even back at the time, people who thought they will not exceed, in terms of control in Yemen, they will not exceed one governorate. But gradually they expanded, took 2 more governorates, 3, they took the capital, they took the seaports on Hodeidah, and they continue to grow and expand.
So then let's talk about the Saudi role in all of this. Saudi is seen as one of America's strongest allies in the region. How much influence do they have?
Well, the Saudis, they were embroiled in an 8-year-long war in Yemen against the Houthis. They've tried everything, aside from throwing in the sink, into quelling the Houthis and pushing them back into the mountains. But they failed to do that. And having realized that they've been hemorrhaging a lot of resources over the past 8 years, having realized that Yemen basically turned into their Vietnam, they resorted to striking a deal with the Houthis. They are seeking, for the past 18 months, an exit strategy from Yemen. And this is one of the reasons why the Saudis came to Sana'a last year and trying to strike that deal. And now they have what we call the peace roadmap, and they're hashing out the details of that roadmap to strike that deal because they want to protect their southern border, create a buffer zone, and they've given a lot of concessions actually to the Houthis to get that, to basically the Houthis sign off on that deal.
So it seems like if the regional players themselves don't have control over the Houthis, and the Houthis now have seen this as an opportunity to expand their operations, perhaps even, a once little-known group in the world is now becoming a big player on the international stage. Where do you see this heading?
Well, this is the thing, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because they've gotten a taste of power. I remember back at the time on their first war with the Yemeni government in 2004, and they were a very small group. And they gradually grew in strength. And the stronger that they got, the more their demands grew and their ambitions grew. And when they basically took control of the state resources, their bar was basically going higher and higher and higher, to the point that now they're threatening the international community, and they're relishing that moment. So they will continue to raise the bar.
And let's go back to a possible resolution here. The Houthis say, and as you had mentioned, though, they are using the Palestinian situation as a way to give them legitimacy, or give their actions legitimacy. If the situation in Gaza is resolved, do you think there will be a change now in the dynamics we're seeing?
Okay, let me just clarify one point. The Houthis do want to support the Palestinians. This is the thing. Yemenis sympathize greatly with what's happening in Palestine. So it's not just that they don't want to support Palestine and they're just using it as an excuse, for instance. They do want to, but they're riding on that wave. They're exploiting that as well. Having said that, the Houthis, if issues are resolved in Palestine, they will find another excuse, another wave to ride, and in an effort to extract more concessions from the international community. We've seen this now and then happening with the Houthis. Whenever a deal is signed with the Houthis in the past, it's usually voided within a few months, because they come back and ask for more.
All right, so let's go to the Gaza situation now, and Israel's onslaught on Gaza and the Palestinian territories that we're seeing. Do you see a resolution on that in the near future? Where do you see that heading?
Unfortunately, I don't, because one of the things that has been pitched by the international community was the two-state solution. But the Netanyahu government has made it very clear that they're not interested in that anymore. So that carrot on the stick is gone. And one of the other things is, with the extent of the devastation that is in Gaza, the amount of blood that has been shed, we have crossed certain lines that it's going to be very difficult to come back from. People are angry, not just in Gaza, across the whole region. And even for now, to rethink about restructuring, rebuilding, rehabilitating Gaza, it won't happen without basically first not just appeasing the population in the Arab region, but also for the Palestinian, and getting something in return. It's not just going to be about putting blocks back in place. This is not about just building roads, restoring sanitation. No, blood has been spilled. You will need a very solid, rigid reconciliation processes in place that will also guarantee Palestinian rights and guarantee that there's not going to be a repeat of what had happened over the past 3 months. So you need a much holistic approach to this conflict. It is no longer just about a ceasefire.
Well, we'll be speaking a little bit more about Gaza later in this program, but Hisham Al-Omeisy, thank you so much for your thoughts and your insight. We'll definitely be checking in on the Middle East situation and what else is happening in the region in the near future, and hope to get you back on. Hisham Al-Omeisy is Yemen conflict analyst, speaking to us from Washington, D.C. Thank you so much. So as mentioned, much of the growing conflicts in the Middle East are fueled by the Israel-Hamas war. It has been more than 3 months since the war broke out in Gaza. The health ministry in the Gaza Strip says that the Palestinian death toll has soared past 25,000. Now, to talk about the current situation, we're joined from Taipei by Tatiana van den Otte, a policy analyst at Safe Spaces, which is a consulting firm focused on Taiwan's new relationships in the context of strategic competition. Tatiana, it's good to have you on the program. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
I'd like to start with a picture of the situation in Gaza now. As we mentioned, the death toll is going past 25,000. Can you give us a sense of what is happening and the humanitarian crisis that the Palestinians are facing?
Beyond the people that are being killed in this indiscriminate carpet bombing of the entirety of the Gaza Strip, There are over 60,000 people who are injured. A lot of them are severely injured and have little to no access to medical aid. There's a heavy food shortage as well. Additionally, 80% of the population has been displaced, so that makes 1.9 million people out of around 2.1 million people. And among those dead, about 70% are women and children.
It paints a very, very troubling and disturbing picture of what is happening there. And there are a lot of international players that are either trying to find a resolution or are inflaming the conflict. Can we talk about which countries in the Middle East are actively supporting the Palestinians? And do the Israelis have backers in the region?
In the region, the role of other Arab countries has always been extremely key and instrumental to the Israeli-Palestinian question. It has also always been a very delicate matter due to the long history of conflict and wars, especially regarding Israel, since the formation of the State of Israel in 1948. So in the region, as it stands right now, the reason it's so delicate is because a lot of the countries' populations, so countries such as Jordan and Egypt, which have previously concluded peace treaties with Israel, their populations are more inflamed and have a more bolstered sense of support among their populations for the Palestinian cause than they have in a long time. So a lot of these governments are dealing with marches and protests amongst their own populations for the Palestinian cause. Egypt is a very prominent example of a country that is in a extremely difficult situation at the moment, in a very special position since it does share a border with Gaza and is witnessing at its border the immense amount of suffering that the inhabitants of Gaza are undergoing. At the same time, it has been a quote-unquote strategic partner for Israel ever since it concluded a peace treaty with it in the 60s, has to undergo negotiations to ensure that the borders are respected.
Right. So the US has been touting a two-state solution for Israel and Palestine, where the Palestinians will have a state next to Israel. Israel has rejected that, and it has been rejected over the past few decades. Can you explain what that solution is and give us some historical perspective to that?
The US and a lot of EU countries have been touting a two-state solution for a while now. Although at this point, without any of the historical context that I'm going to go into in a bit, it does feel a little bit like a blanket statement that doesn't actually address the impediments to such a solution. So the two-state solution essentially means that there will be a Palestinian state, a sovereign Palestinian state governed by Palestinians, by a Palestinian authority, alongside an Israeli state. And in an ideal world, these two states will be living side by side peacefully. There have been many attempts over the decades, ever since the formation of the State of Israel, for some sort of two-state solution. However, I think it is very notable that none of these have ever truly worked due to the succession of wars and failed accords in combination with continued Israeli illegal occupation and encroachment of Palestinian land. So right now it is, as everything stands at the moment, it is not a viable solution. One only has to look at the current map of Israel-Palestine as a whole and look at the discontinuity of the Palestinian territories to understand why it is not viable. And this has only been allowed through illegal Israeli settlements, encroachment of Palestinian villages, home demolitions, making the solution near impossible. So every two-state solution has involved some sort of fragmentation or a lack of continuous Palestinian territory, which would make it an extremely fractured sort of solution. So one has to address all of these before even getting to the possibility of a two-state solution in the current day.
Right, and in terms of holding Israel to account, South Africa has now taken Israel to the International Court of Justice, accusing them of genocide. What do you think this will achieve, and is this somewhat a step in getting some kind of accountability or resolution?
South Africa's case is definitely landmark. If you look at the arguments made by the South African lawyers, they demonstrate Israel's pattern of conduct showing genocidal intent. They put a 10-page document forward full of explicit statements made by politicians, army generals, and soldiers that display strong genocidal intent as well, and are also aiming as fast as possible to display the urgency in providing these provisional measures, showing that grave consequences would come out of this if these measures aren't put forth. So I believe it is quite likely that the court will issue such measures, hopefully in the coming weeks.
But the bigger question remains on whether Israel will take heed and whether these actions or measures that are imposed upon Israel are binding. But we'll have to leave it there. Tatiana van den Haute, political analyst at Safe Spaces, thank you so much for joining us from Taipei. And for our viewers everywhere, it has been good to have your company. If you've enjoyed today's episode or have anything you'd like to add to the dialogue, do join the conversation on our social media. And remember, stay informed, stay engaged, and stay connected.